Hello, welcome to Risky Bitness. This is part 3 of Is Final Fantasy XIII Really That Bad? In this final installment, I'll be focusing on what I feel is the largest part of Final Fantasy XIII, the storytelling. We'll be taking a deep dive into the lore, characters, and narrative of Final Fantasy XIII and ask the question, is it really that bad? Once again, I'll be off camera for this video, mainly because this whole quarantine thing has me putting on weight, but also because it's just easier to edit the videos if I don't have to edit that piece, and I think it doesn't really make a huge difference for the viewers. So if you want to see my face again, let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to get on camera again, but if you don't care, we'll leave it the way it is. I hope everyone's doing really well during this very trying time. As I record this, it's Easter Sunday, so it's probably a few weeks after this that it'll finally get uploaded. I don't have Final Fantasy VII Remake yet. I'm still waiting on Amazon to send that. It should be here on Tuesday, so I'm looking forward to that. Whether I'll make a video on it, I don't know yet, but I'll certainly be playing it, and we can discuss it in the comments here or elsewhere where I link this video. That all being said, though, I want to thank my subscribers and everyone who's been watching my content. It's really great to start forming an audience here, and I feel like this content is finally getting to a point where I can really be proud of what I'm doing here. So please like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications, tell your friends about it so that I can reach a wider audience. I'll be able to make more videos. I'll be able to make better videos because I'll have more resources available. Once I start being able to monetize these videos, it's going to make a big difference in what I'm capable of producing for you. So please help me out in any way that you can. There's also some links in the description. They're just affiliate links, no big deal. If you purchase some of the products from those affiliate links, I'll get a small commission on those. It's not much, but hey, it's something. Alright, now let's get back into Final Fantasy XIII. Now, if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2 yet, please follow the links down in the description. I also have more RPG and Final Fantasy content, and you can find those links in the description too. And I also want to thank you for clicking on this video even after you saw how long it is. I don't know as of right now while I'm recording this script how long it's actually going to be, but based on my word count, it's going to be the longest video I've made to date, so thank you so much for your patience in coming in to watch this. There is a lot to unpack here. When I was talking to other Final Fantasy fans about this game, a common complaint was that the story was forgettable and not engaging. They said the characters aren't sympathetic, and that they were given no reason to care about these characters. In this video, we'll be diving into the lore, characters, and narrative, and ask why people feel this way about this game, and are those feelings grounded in something concrete that we can tell just by examining the game, or is there something a little more abstract causing that point of view? Settle in, because we are going in deep. Just a warning, this video contains spoilers, so if you haven't played Final Fantasy XIII yet, or haven't played it to the end, I recommend doing so before watching the rest of this video. If you've reached Grand Pulse, you're pretty close to the end. That's where most people seem to quit, but you're very close to the end if you've gotten to that point. Anyway, let's dive in. The worlds of Cocoon and Pulse have a tremendous amount of lore. It's actually a little overwhelming. In fact, the terminology is downright confusing, and this was one of my biggest complaints when I first played the game. l'Cie, fal'Cie, Pulse l'Cie, Seath. It's all a lot to take in, and the first time I played, I had absolutely no idea what in the world was supposed to be happening. There is an in-game encyclopedia called the Datalog. This updates as you play, and it contains pretty in-depth explanations of the in-game lore. It may not be ideal to slow down your game just to brush up on the lore, but it's really nice that it's there. On the other hand, if the game did a good enough job of telling the story, it wouldn't need an in-game reference to explain everything that the game failed to explain through all the dialogue and cutscenes. With how much exposition is in this game, there shouldn't have to be an in-game encyclopedia to build on all that exposition. It should all be contained in those hours upon hours of dialogue. I think I did follow along better the second time though, once I had an idea of what to expect. This is my understanding of the lore, without going into the datalog or using the internet to explain anything I may have missed. Pulse and Cocoon are two worlds at war, and they have been for a very long time before the game began. The war is being fought between the fal'Cie on Cocoon and the fal'Cie on Pulse, who are godlike beings that use magical powers to transform humans into l'Cie. Once a human has been cursed and becomes a l'Cie, he or she is given a focus, a goal that must be accomplished. If Lilith is successful, she lives forever encased in crystal. If she fails, she becomes a Sazh, a mindless monster. Cocoon is the world above, where the bulk of this story takes place and where most of the main characters come from. Residents of Cocoon view Pulse as a haven of villainy and believe that all people from Pulse are evil, and that they are nothing more than criminals and terrorists. I think you can see the parallels to our own world and history and the way groups of people perceive and treat each other. We'll talk more about those messages and themes later on in the video, but I think you probably also feel like this sounds just a little bit familiar. The world-building aspect of this game is something often referenced in negative reviews. It's difficult to effectively build a world when the player is confined to moving in a straight line. There seems to be a lot more to this world that you're never going to see. Cocoon feels like such a dead world as you're moving through it. Even the cutscenes don't show you much of what Cocoon is really like, and you spend most of your time walking a path straight through the underground and back areas. The only places that seem populated by other humans are Nautilus and Palom. But Nautilus is basically the gold saucer, so again, it's going back to that Final Fantasy VII well, and this game does that a lot. It's like they knew they had things that worked in Final Fantasy VII, it's their most popular game ever, and they know it worked, so they sort of adopted it into this game, but it doesn't have the genes to make that make sense. It's not explaining why those things work or understanding why they work. They just knew it worked and they just kind of threw it in. On my second playthrough, though, I recognize that there is a narrative in-universe reason that the world building is handled in this way. In every Final Fantasy game up to this point, your characters have either been heroes from the beginning, or they've been neutral enough to not be recognized. They've had some anonymity. NPCs were either indifferent toward you or excited to help you on your quest. In Final Fantasy XIII, you're Sazh, the enemies of Cocoon. It's on TV. You have tattoos on your body that give it away. It wouldn't make sense to have you walk into a town, stay at the inn, and buy supplies from shops. It would undermine the entire plot. It's critical to the story that the citizens of Cocoon regard you with anger and fear. You're supposed to be on the run. Stopping to chat with people just wouldn't make any sense in that context. But that kind of begs the point. I mean, doesn't that really fundamentally break the rules of what a Final Fantasy title even is? If you were going to define what are the main principal key elements of a Final Fantasy game, wouldn't the use of hub towns as places to gather equipment and information be a staple of what a Final Fantasy title is? For a lot of us, Grand Pulse was a stopping point, and I was really curious as to why that is. I've come up with a couple of possible reasons for that. I think that Grand Pulse is just too jarring a change after spending 25 hours on Cocoon. As many of us disliked walking in a straight line for most of the game, when you hit that sudden change, it's still kind of bizarre. It's a lot like our on-screen characters suddenly have this tremendous amount of freedom and absolutely no idea what to do with it. The game does give you actually a pretty fun kind of side mission setup, but it's big. Like, there's so many hunts that you can go on once you get to Grand Pulse. And even the exploration you have there, you have some freedom of exploration, but wherever you go, eventually you're going down another hallway. There are just more different hallways to go down now, and one big hub in the middle. You get to ride a chocobo, though. That's cool. Now, on my first playthrough, I did roll my eyes pretty hard at the use of these character names after weather patterns. Once again, it's going back to that Final Fantasy VII well, and even Final Fantasy VIII Squall is a sort of weather as well. It's a throwback to ideas that were successful in the past, but it doesn't make the connection to understanding of why it worked, or any kind of meaningful context or connection to that ancestral DNA of the franchise. And if that wasn't enough, they beat us over the head by naming a character Hope. It's so on the nose, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is just so in your face. Hope and what he says and what it means in the story, it's just jamming it down your throat. Another thing that's really striking is an early flashback cutscene that goes back to a really emotional sequence between Snow and Sarah. I just remember thinking that I don't know enough about these characters to care about them. Here's a very emotional romantic scene, but I've given absolutely no reason to care about either of these characters. Up until now, the story hasn't told me who they are. There's been no development. I don't know these people. I don't care about them. From a storytelling point of view, this is a huge mistake. You need to develop characters and tell the audience who they are before expecting any kind of emotional investment. This is a fundamental rule of storytelling across all media. Even comic books, video games, movies, TV, whatever it is. If you don't make me care about the characters, but then you want me to watch a scene that requires emotional investment, it just feels forced, and that romance between Snow and Sarah really feels forced. By the end of this game, I still don't care about Sarah at all. Now, on my second playthrough, getting deeper into the story and lore, the weather names actually do begin to make a little bit of sense. They all tell us something about the character. Lightning's a little obvious. It's a name she gave herself to evoke the strength of lightning. However, she is as fierce and unpredictable as a storm, as illustrated in her reactions to Snow's pleading with her about Sarah earlier in the game. She's very hot-tempered, and I think that has a lot to do with it. Vanille is just the French word for vanilla, and it rather perfectly captures the mild sweetness of the character. Vanilla's a little bit of a problematic character for other reasons. I mean, did they really have to make a young woman character in this game who moans very provocatively every time she ever does anything? I don't know if it's fan service or if it's not intended to be that way, but it just is. But it's kind of creepy. You know, it's just she's half naked, she's running around, and every time she does anything, she has these provocative moans. It just feels icky and wrong. Maybe it's because I'm older and I'm a dad, and it just really, really rubbed me the wrong way. I really dislike Vanille for this reason. Snow is a single-focused character. Everything is black and white to him. There's no room for shades of gray with Snow. Moreover, his unyielding faith and confidence in an absolute good and his unflinching optimism are as pure as the driven Snow. There's no convincing Snow at any point in the game that there's any possible outcome of this adventure than for him to save Sarah and save Cocoon. Hope, like I said before, he's a little on the nose. He represents the concept of hope in a very raw form. His character growth, as he overcomes his feelings of vengeance towards Snow, is the fulfillment of hope. It also invokes an idea of this group of misfits carrying hope with them wherever they go, even in the darkest of times. And we'll get a little bit more into what hope has to say, both explicitly and in the story, a little bit later, and just a spoiler alert, they overlap way more than they should. Fang's name, I think, just speaks to her warrior spirit and her tribal appearance, and maybe sort of the biting nature of her comments and the way she deals with the other characters in the game. She's very, very blunt with everybody. But she's not that developed as a character in the game. I like Fang, I think she's cool, I like the character design. She's probably the best designed character in the game, if we're being totally honest. But they don't really do very much with her, apart from say, oh, I'm Fang, I was... Spoiler coming, I was Ragnarok, I feel bad now. Sazh is the only character without an obvious meaning to his name, and I couldn't find any references on the internet to the word Sazh. I also majored in English and have never heard any word called Sazh. It's not an English word, it's not like a Germanic word, it's not like a French word, it's not in any of the Romance languages or Latin. So I think it's just a manufactured name that they made for the game. Kitase stated in an interview with official PlayStation Magazine that Sazh was inspired by Eddie Murphy and was meant to be comic relief, but also sympathetic. It's a strange dichotomy to be sure. In spite of this, I found Sazh to be the most relatable character out of the entire cast. He seems to be the one who most often explains things to the other characters, and while he's explaining to them, he's also explaining it to us, the players. I'm not really too sure where this comic relief is supposed to be happening. He has a silly run animation and a chocobo that lives in his hair, but other than that, he doesn't really do or say anything funny in the game. In some of the optional content, he does some kind of funny stuff. But if he's supposed to be comic relief, why am I only seeing him do funny things at the end of the game during optional content? A negative to Kitase's description is the implication that other characters must be less sympathetic, if Sazh was specifically intended to be written as a specific sympathetic character. So you have to think, if this guy's a sympathetic character, what are the rest of these characters? And I think that's a big gripe that the audience tends to have with this game. A lot of fans, though, they really dislike Hope and Snow in particular, and I have a very different interpretation of these two characters. While many fans complain that Hope is whiny, I didn't get that from him at all. Unfortunately, I can say honestly that after playing this game, I still don't know who Hope is. This points to poor character development, at least for him. I know what he is, and I can see the growth and experiences. He buries the hatchet with Snow, he realizes that his mother's death was not Snow's fault, but once his story arc ends, he sort of fades into the background. I think the perception of whininess comes from the fact that Hope's entire story arc is very emotional, but he doesn't take us with him. Again, we're just not given a reason to care. He has a pretty big revelation later in the game, and he makes a speech about free will, which is a central theme in this game. It's a standout moment, but it starts to really kind of turn that screw of Hope becoming just much too obvious. He's virtually breaking the fourth wall. It's a problem, I think, of the fragmented storytelling of the game, and a lot of players just don't feel connected to these characters because of that. You're constantly stopping what you're doing to get more storyline or more exposition. There's just no time to make any kind of emotional connection to these characters. Also, in the beginning of the game, you have this ensemble and you're constantly switching between these groups of characters. So you're exploring their story arcs in bite-sized pieces, but you're never getting any significant amount of any one character's story arc. If I can get back to Snow, and I know it sounds like I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I promise you it's all flowing in a specific way to get us to where we need to go. Snow may be my favorite character in the game. Maybe Sazh, maybe Snow, I'm not really sure. But I think Snow's kind of like the Guy Fieri of Final Fantasy XIII. Everybody seems to hate him, but he's only ever done good things. Snow proves himself time and time again to be a selfless hero. I mean, sure, he is singularly focused, and his romantic dream of being a hero, his blind devotion to a black and white view of the world, it does come off a little naive, but it's what makes him charming as a character. There's just no discouraging him. He believes in the absolute best thing, and there's nothing else in the world. He's the only member of the group that makes up his mind from the very start that they are heroes, and not the enemies of Cocoon, no matter what anyone tells them. And as annoying as this is, he turns out to be totally right. Without Snow's unshakable optimism, defeating the Fal'Cie and saving Cocoon would not have been possible. He becomes the de facto leader of the group later on in the game. Lightning might be the titular character, but Snow is absolutely the leader. The story arc of each character is a driving force behind the story, and the relationships are crucial to character development and growth. Some of the arcs, like Lightning's overall arc, are long and it kind of overlaps with other story arcs, while a lot of them are short, like Hope's. In every case, though, the characters learn and grow through their shared experiences and conflicts. Lightning and Snow have one of the longer arcs that starts with Sarah becoming a Lassie, and doesn't end until the end of the game when their mutual love of Sarah overcomes their conflict with each other, and Lightning grows to admire and respect Snow instead of resenting and judging him. Vanille teaches Sazh the value of mercy, and Sazh in turn teaches Vanille that the sins of her past can be forgiven. Vanille's need for redemption very likely drives the conclusion of the story. Snow teaches Hope that vengeance is not justice, and in turn he learns that his obsession with heroism has consequences that he has to take responsibility for. It seems rather heavily implied without being explicitly stated that Fang and Vanille are in a romantic relationship, and their arc is all about the ups and downs and the sacrifices we make for love. Now that could just be my interpretation. I'm not sure if it was intended that way. I know that Fang, I think, refers to Vanille as her partner at one point, and the scenes they have together do feel kind of intense. I might be just reading into things a little bit too much. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Sadly, Final Fantasy XIII is very bad at building its supporting cast. There are some interesting NPCs, but they don't really get enough dialogue or screen time to become fully developed. The focus is so much on the hero characters that there's just no time for them. By the time I reached Bartantalus, I had forgotten who the Primarch even was. Even the villains, they just kind of drop in and out of the story willy-nilly, and we never learn very much about them. It's hard to feel invested in defeating an enemy if I don't know how or why I'm fighting them. Cid is probably the most troublesome character in this regard. I'm still really confused by his role in the earlier part of the story. When Snow's captured, he meets Fang and Cid, who act hostile toward him. Then later on we learn that they're actually friendly to our heroes and oppose the Sanctum, But this is never explained until Snow and Fang show up to save the party from Psycom. And then only retrospectively. It doesn't make sense from a storytelling perspective. The reveal that Cid is a friendly character happens off camera, after he spends a lot of time reinforcing that he's not. Later, Cid, who was not present when Bartandalus revealed your focus, attacks you to stop you from fulfilling that focus. Does he have some kind of omniscience? Why did he bring you to the Palamisia to start with if he knew all along what your purpose was? It's a plot hole you could fly a limblum through. The battle with Cid that happens later is supposed to be bittersweet. It's a betrayal by a trusted ally, but it's a betrayal motivated by a desire to do the right thing. Cid isn't trying to kill you because he wants you to fail to save Cocoon, he wants to kill you because he thinks you'll destroy it. On paper, it should have a lot of magnitude, but in practice, the emotional connection just never happens. I know I should care that Cid betrayed us, but I don't because I don't know him and I don't care about him. I think this contributes to the part of the game where many of us just stop playing. Even on my second playthrough with my attempt to accentuate the positive, this was a big negative for me. Cid is not the only part of the story that looks good on paper but is hard to connect with emotionally, and I'll discuss that a bit more later as we go on. We're over 20 minutes now, and I appreciate it if you're still with me at this point. Definitely, if you're still listening, please do subscribe and like. I'm going to have more content like this. Most of my videos are going to be much shorter, but this is something that I really felt like I could deep dive into and really sink my teeth into. If you're enjoying this kind of content, let me know down in the comments if you want to have more of these sort of video essays, as it were. Now, at this point, take a little break maybe and pause the video because you're going to want to mentally prepare yourself for this discussion. It's going to get really heavy, and I saved the narrative elements for last because there's just so much meat on these bones. I shouldn't say last. Thematic elements are last, but they kind of tie into the narrative, so there's a lot to unpack. I'll do my best to not launch into an entire literary analysis. As I wrote the script, I worked really hard to not do that, but there were some points where it kind of had to go there. But once again, if it's something that you enjoy and want to hear more, let me know in the comments, and I can do this kind of thing more often. Now, the story of Final Fantasy XIII is told through a combination of flashbacks, cutscenes, and in-game dialogue between the characters. As you move through the game, it becomes clear immediately that the game itself is really just a frame for the story being told. To summarize, without spoilers, Final Fantasy XIII, even though I gave you spoilers already, Final Fantasy XIII tells the story of a group of refugees fleeing from a specialized military force that wants to kill them. It relies very heavily on the ensemble cast and the exploration of the relationships between the cast members. As you get to know them, you find out they're all misfits, and they kind of have been since before the story even began. As always, in this kind of story, the misfits are the only ones removed enough from the world they live in to expose it for what it is and bring down the real bad guys. There has to be a little bit of a disconnect, I think, between the heroes and the society they're a part of in order for them to be able to look outside the box like that, right? There are really detailed recaps that come up whenever you load a saved game, but I often find myself surprised by some of what the recap tells me. There are definitely pieces of the story that aren't told very well, and you have to rely on a recap to fill in the blanks. It's a pretty serious flaw in the narrative. Why not explain through dialogue instead of having me learn it from the text? There's already so much exposition in this game. I'm not going to launch into a summary of the whole plot here this late into the video, but the main bullet points are: Sarah is a l'Cie. The player characters go to her either on purpose or by chance, depending on the character. They confront a fal'Cie who turns them all into l'Cie. Confusing as the terminology is, just remember fal'Cie, god, l'Cie, person. The player characters find out that the Primarch of Cocoon is also a fal'Cie, who is manipulating them into exterminating the people of Cocoon so the fal'Cie can rule the world again. Your heroes are bound to their focus, but use their free will to escape their fate and save Cocoon. Okay, that's kind of a major spoiler, but if you're listening this far, obviously you don't like it. That's kind of like the super abridged Cliff Notes version, but I think I hit on the most important plot points. I'm probably missing some things here and there, because like I said, it doesn't really do a great job of telling you the story. For the l'Cie, success is eternal life as crystal, which to me seems really terrible. The people of Pulse and Cocoon see this as an honor, and I think there's some disconnect there already. It seems like you're doomed no matter what you do, so it's kind of hard to sympathize with the characters. No matter what they do, they're screwed. Where's the upside? We're going to dive a little bit deeper into that, but first I want to talk about the problem of Pulse. When talking to other Final Fantasy fans about this game, I found that Grand Pulse was where the game stopped for most of us. And I talked a little bit about that earlier. By this time, you can now change the characters that are in your party. You can develop the character into any role that you want. There's so much more to do, but players lose interest at this point. And I talked before about how suddenly having all this freedom is a big stopping point. There are those two really big boss battles that have huge impact on the storyline. Bartandalus and Cid. Once they're gone, it does kind of feel a little bit hollow. Even though they weren't developed that much, they really did seem like who should have been the end bosses of the game, right? And it just kind of feels like there's not that much story left. So then the entire landscape that you're playing in totally changes, but it's kind of after you feel like the story should be over. And this has been done before in Final Fantasy games. You had the World of Ruin in Final Fantasy VI, but it was just executed a lot better. And I had a pretty good feeling of, who Gestalt was, a pretty good feeling of who Kefka was. I understood and cared about the characters in my party, and I understood why the world was changing. They don't do as good a job here with it. It's just a huge break to that world building we talked about before. Even though the world building wasn't that great, at least it was logical, it followed its own rules. But after spending the last 25 hours walking in a straight line and suddenly now having a vast open plain to explore, I just don't know what to do with all that freedom at this point. And I think it's a little bit overwhelming. I think you see that and you say, where's the path? Where am I supposed to be going right now? Now, there's a great deal to be said for the rigidity of Pulse and the contrast with Cocoon. Because once you reach Grand Pulse, you have some freedom to explore, and Pulse is supposed to be this wild place full of wicked people. But the main thing that seems to differentiate Pulse from Cocoon is that freedom. Cocoon is very rigid, so while you're there, you can only walk in a straight line. It's not until you break away from the shackles of imposed order that you finally experience freedom. I think that's a little bit of a commentary on the strictness of the leadership of Cocoon, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But they keep their people in a box. And on Pulse, people aren't in a box. And I think it's intentional for the player to experience that as they transfer from Cocoon to Pulse. One thing I did observe on both of my playthroughs is that while the story looks really good on paper, I just can't seem to get connected to it emotionally. It's just something that I feel like is a really critical element to RPGs, and Final Fantasy in particular. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more at the end when we wrap this up. I think it might be the fast-paced run-to-the-next cutscene style of gameplay that really kills the immersion, or maybe prevents me from getting a resonance with the characters in the story. It's just not there for me. And I really think it's the execution. Usually in these games, the player feels connected to the story and characters because we're experiencing it. It's happening to us, Here, it's not happening to us. The number of cutscenes just makes it feel more like we're just observing the story instead of participating in it. So now we're going to get to the themes and messages in the game. And when discussing theme, I think in any story there are two fundamental questions we have to ask. The first question is, what is this work trying to say? The second is, how is this work communicating that message? Now, to the first question, there are several themes in Final Fantasy XIII. Some are typical of the franchise and others are new. The main idea that seems to permeate throughout the entire story is that of free will. Most l'Cie, when given their focus, will tirelessly seek to fulfill that focus. Or they'll give in to despair. Whether they fail in their focus or simply give up, l'Cie are doomed to a living hell as a seat. For our heroes, success in their focus means the destruction of Cocoon and the death of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of innocent people. Again and again, our heroes, Hope in particular, make it a point to remind the player that they have free will and can choose what they're going to do. Here, they break the cycle of the two worlds, defying the powers that be and deciding their own fate. They refuse to fulfill their focus or give in to despair. They will fight to protect Cocoon and find a way to bring back Sarah and avoid becoming Seed. This brings us to the second theme, which is a little bit more complex. The theme of obeisance to authority. This is explored mainly in the people of Cocoon who react violently toward the l'Cie. They encourage the purge and they turn a blind eye to the execution of the l'Cie. When the Primarch and the Sanctum tell the people of Cocoon that the L'Cie are the enemy, that they're dangerous criminals and terrorists, the people react by attacking the L'Cie or allowing terrible things to happen to them. This probably sounds familiar to anybody who has taken a history course or is paying attention even to what's going on in the world right now. Prejudice and discrimination are absolutely a theme as well. The image of loading a group of undesirable people into trains should be immediately familiar for reasons that YouTube would not want me discussing here. The L'Cie and any who were in contact with them were demonized by the government and media, and then they're ostracized and even executed. This couldn't be clearer if the SciComm soldiers were wearing red armbands. Now to the second question. There's very little by way of nuance here. Final Fantasy XIII makes its thematic points with all the subtlety of a jackhammer. Characters simply say what they're thinking. This approach feels preachy, heavy-handed, and a little lazy. Good storytelling assumes some intelligence on the part of the audience and allows them to think about the ideas being presented and decide how they feel about those themes. I think how well this resonates with the audience really depends upon where the player is in his or her life. For younger players who are likely students, some of these ideas are very likely novel and will be more well received. But I think older players who have been exposed to a larger pool of stories may reject the way the narrative explores these themes. I mean, it's more than a little on the nose, right? As I described above, it's literally about a leader who loads people on a train and exterminates them. On that note, if any of you are looking for a college paper to write, you're welcome. In summary, Final Fantasy XIII makes some critical mistakes in its storytelling. It tells the story by annoying us and interrupting our game with tremendous amounts of exposition, and then expects us to feel connected to these characters before it even gives us a clear idea of who they are. It just beats us over the head with its themes and doesn't give us any opportunity to think for ourselves. On the other hand, while many fans dislike the characters, I feel that this is more because of the forced empathy that occurs earlier in the story. I don't think they're bad characters, and I don't think they're written poorly. They're definitely redeemed later in the story through their interpersonal arcs, and by the end of the game I had a good understanding of who these people are and what drives them. They've all experienced some kind of growth or change. I even like Snow, who gets a lot of hate because he is the voice of optimism and unstoppable perseverance, and that drives the rest of the characters to escaping their fate. The story itself isn't bad, it's just told badly. It's fine, it offers nothing novel. The ham-fisted delivery of themes and the annoying pacing are what really throws it off. I think the same story told in a different way would have been much more well received. Those themes still have value though, and I think this game has important things to say, especially in today's world where I think we've become more cynical than ever and can be far too quick to judge others. It's important to have reminders that we all have the freedom of will to resist the culture of hatred and fear, and to face the challenges in our lives with Snow's decisive optimism, even when the cards are stacked against us. They tried some new things here and played with a different storytelling format, and I didn't really think it worked the way it was intended for many of us. For me, Final Fantasy has always been synonymous with experiencing an emotional connection to the characters in the story. I never felt this connection to Final Fantasy XIII. It all looks good on paper, but there was crucial, visceral, intangible elements that simply weren't there. Having played through it all the way now, I don't think it's a bad game, it's just missing that Final Fantasy magic. Still, this game has many die-hard fans who love the story, characters, and gameplay. Some even feel that it's the best in the franchise, and it's their favorite game. Maybe I'm just getting old and these games aren't really meant for me anymore, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments how you feel about this game. Tell me a little bit about yourself too. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and be sure to share it on your social media pages and blogs if you really want to help the channel grow. Now, I know this essay was presented in something of a flow of consciousness format. Even though I had a script, I definitely bounced between a few points here and there. So, if something sounds a little bit contradictory, just understand that the conclusion is my final thoughts on the matter, and earlier I was just kind of thinking it out and writing it, thinking out loud. So I hope it wasn't confusing, and I hope you guys all understood what I was trying to say about this game. But the fact that it's that difficult for me to articulate my feelings toward it, my thoughts toward it, without contradicting myself, just kind of goes to show how poor the overall execution was. So what's our conclusion here? After 3 parts and nearly an hour discussing the themes of this game, really, is Final Fantasy XIII really that bad? No, it's fine. It's not great. It's not excellent. And it's definitely not as good as what we've all come to expect from a Final Fantasy game. It's not a bad game. It's not a bad story. They're not bad characters. It just doesn't have that Final Fantasy magic, and the way the story is told just doesn't work the way that I think it was intended. Nevertheless, the game sold exceptionally well. It's the fastest selling game in the history of Final Fantasy. It was tremendously successful in Japan, reasonably successful in the US. I mean, when it comes down to it, we all, as gamers and as Final Fantasy fans, we voted for this with our wallets. And as long as we keep on doing that, we're going to keep on getting more of the same. So from now on, let's all learn a little bit of a lesson from this. If you disliked Final Fantasy XIII and felt it was a bad game, or didn't meet your expectations, don't pre-order video games, or buy them on day one of release. Borrow or rent them first. Watch gameplay videos and reviews, see what your friends think. Let's keep our wallets closed until we know for sure that the developers and publishers of these big, expensive games are giving us what we're looking for. That's probably the real lesson we learned from Final Fantasy XIII. I also didn't talk about the sequels and the trilogy in this video, because these videos were just about Final Fantasy XIII. If the sequels and the trilogy as a whole are something you would like me to explore, let me know down in the comments below. Now, I have gone on talking for far too long at this point, and those last few minutes were all ad-libbed, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. If you have anything to add, let me know in the comments. Until next time, game over.